Morning, Jim.
How are you?
I'm doing very well.
Well, it's good to see you.
Remind me what we're drinking this morning?
We're drinking the Total Eclipse. It's a dark roast from Social Cup, so we're drinking local. The owner was kind enough to let me sample all 5 different varieties, and so this is their darker roast. We typically drink their dark roast, and then we come back to the light roast.
All right, cool. Well, want to ask a couple questions this morning. First, get right down to business. What are your big culinary plans for the weekend?
Well, as you know, I have probably thought about this. So Friday night typically is some kind of delicious piece of meat, steak, filet, or ribeye, and accompanied by some kind of delicious sauce. Of course, I'll reverse sear this with a lot of smoke, put a hard sear on it. Then I'll make some delicious sauce like a brown sage butter. Sage is coming in good in my garden right now. And that's always nice. Or like a bourbon cream sauce or a balsamic reduction. None of these are difficult to make, and I just love to make sauces. And Saturday is Saturday's a day where I push back the weeds in Eden. So I just kind of work about 5 hours in my yard hard, and the culmination of that is my kids come over, we eat outside, and we talk all week about what we're going to eat. Food's love in our family, and my kids want to know what we're eating and how we're preparing it. And so this week we're going a little lighter than normal. We're doing homemade pizzas cooked over really hot coals on the Kamado, and so and of course we the basil and the thyme and the herbs, the oregano come out of the garden, and always lots of goat cheese and a delicious sauce on there, and then just various sundry kinds of meats. And everybody's kind of doing keto now, so I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what the crust looks like for my keto eaters, but it'll be delicious.
I think the cauliflower stuff can be passable.
You think so?
If you get the right stuff, it can be passable.
I've not tried it yet.
It's all right.
Have you had the, I don't remember the name of it, something about no more carbs or something, this bread? I think that's what they're planning.
Allie got some gluten-free bread that we then donated to ducks that I think also rejected it. So I'm not.
Yeah, we're sort of like hobbits. We'll set debating food at the edge of ruin.
Yeah.
And that's just sort of what we do.
That's
life in the mundane.
So that's a good transition. Speaking of the edge of ruin.
Where we are right now.
Yeah, what was your most surprising discovery or insight about this series we're wrapping up today on practicing the King's economy?
Probably just how meticulously God, of course, Israel was to be a light to the nations, and so when you look at how God designed Israel, it revolves around obviously justice laws and temple worship, but a surprising amount is work, and so just how intricate work is and God is interested and blesses the ability to work, because God's a worker, and wealth creation, and also that designed in such a way that there would be no poor among us. So there were elaborate systems to ensure against just long-term indebtedness, and the way you arrange your fields, you never glean to the edges, and that it's just it's a big deal. I mean, we spend most of our waking hours doing work, and so we should think hard about that, and also about what our practices are in the larger community.
What was the hardest thing about all of that to get across to the congregation? What do you feel like maybe people didn't hear or weren't able to hear that you wish they would?
Well, everything is so political, and so how you talk about these things is tricky. I do think the hardest thing, and I think history, I think all the surveys and stuff that Barna does is that God really has a claim on our wealth. He really has a claim on our wealth, and just the way He set up Gleaning Laws, God provided for us to work and provide, of course, for our families. But God was also interested in the larger community, and I mean the whole idea of not gleaning to the edges and allowing people to take care of the poor, the marginalized, the sojourners, the Levites who didn't have a share. It's just pretty insightful. It's pretty hard to figure out how we do that even now. We're not in an agrarian culture, and on the one hand, it's easy just to sort of enslave the poor, or it's just easy to ignore the poor, the marginalized, and the weak. And the one thing we started this with, and it's on almost every psalm, is how God's heart is for the poor, the broken, and the needy. And God's people ought to run out for that. So that when we do our budgets and stuff, we have to think what we make, and then as Paul said, work with our own hands so that we have some provide for ourselves and to share with others. I just think that's hard. I think that's hard for me to think about, and it's easier to think about than to put into practice in a meaningful way, where we're just not continuing poverty and enabling, yet on the other hand we're not ignoring. So I think that's hard. I think our work practices show that, as we'll talk about this week. But I get ahead of myself. So, yeah.
I feel like you're right on time, because my next question was like, what is the bottom line of this week's sermon, and how does it wrap up the whole thing?
I would say we're talking about the Sabbath this week, and I think we don't think of the Sabbath in terms of an economic thing, as it turns out to be in the larger community. So I think a couple of things are going on. Number one is, I think we sold our birthright. The whole idea for people to take, and think about this, these are people who were slaves. They had worked 7 days a week for 400 some years. And then all of a sudden, they're put in a land where they don't work one day. It kind of sort of started in the wilderness, and you can just imagine the dialogue when kids wake up one day. I mean, they've worked. That's all they've seen. I mean, it's sort of like trauma. And God said, well, you'll gather enough. You don't have to work on Sunday. And like God was having to get that slave mentality out of them. And like most things with trauma, you can get people out of a bad situation, but it's a lot of love, a lot of patience, and a long journey to get the trauma out of them, to get them to live into their birthright, we might say. So for Israel, they are given this lavish land, and they're told that they get one holiday a week. They're not slaves anymore. And then they're reminded that, because it's just like, it was just as hard for God's ancient people to see that once things are good, we really don't have an obligation over here. So God set these gleaning laws up, and interestingly enough, he reminds them that they gleaned in the wilderness for 40 years. So there's no self-made man here. God had provided where we had to depend on Him for 40 years, and so now He's saying you're going to be the hands and feet, and people are going to glean from you. So that's one thing. So everybody rest. So there is this economic component that everybody gets a day off. Everybody can unplug. And so, but I do think this. I think we're all born in the wilderness. I mean, that's sin. We're in chaotic souls, and we just tend to adopt the cultural norms, which is to not unplug, whether it's technology or work, and we've got certain lifestyles. And so the Sabbath rest does become a real faith issue. Can I really trust God that I can work 5 or 6 days and really take a day to unplug for avocation, or, as Eugene Peterson says, the Sabbath is a delight, and it's for prayer and play. So I kind of like that. I think that's a good thing.
I feel like the most fascinating thing that you said in that was that they get a holiday once a week, and we so often think about Sabbath as like mandatory nap time. Like we've worked so hard, we need to crash, But what would it be like for us to imagine one day a week as a holiday? And so we feast big, and we make sure we're taking care of our family. I don't know if you're a big Kanye West fan, but he's got a song on his last album, "Closed on Sunday, You My Chick-fil-A," and which at first seemed so campy and silly, but then I started thinking about it, and like what the verses are talking about is really him saying, you know what? It is countercultural, but I've decided I'm going to do this. My family is going to be as closed on Sunday as Chick-fil-A is, and I'm going to teach them the ways of God, because we're no longer anybody's slaves. Well, he actually made that connection.
Yeah, we're sons and daughters, and so God can take care of us.
Yeah.
But we just sort of live in the cultural ethos of incessant work. I mean, 25% of the people do not take all of their vacations. And I mean, we do know from and I was there, you probably weren't, but they were writing in the 80s and 90s with all this technology and all the advent of automation, that we'd have a 20-day work week or a 30-day work week, and I guess we'd just be bonbons and playing all the time, and quite the reverse has happened, tragically. Yeah, we just don't unplug. And technology, I think in our day has as much to do with that. We just stay, particularly now, we just keep scrolling the feeds and activating the amygdala and staying almost traumatized, and we just can't rest.
Yeah.
We just can't rest. Can't turn loose.
So as we're wrapping up this series, we have had the privilege of having really great artwork with our series, and so we've actually framed a lot of them and put them around the church. What do you hope that people, when they walk up to the piece from Practicing the King's Economy, that they remember from this series? They look at it and they go, "Oh yeah, that was the series where what?"
A couple of things. Number one is, it's like Dorothy Sayers said, I've heard 1,000 sermons on don't get drunk and be good, but I've never heard one meaningful sermon on work. So I tend to think we just kind of either are ashamed of wealth, or we just think we got to give it all away, and I just don't see that anywhere in the Bible. And so I do want people to take away that work is needful for us. I mean, we spend the majority of our productive time, and if God doesn't speak into that, then we're living in bad faith, okay? So that work would be our prayer. I mean, it is a sacramental thing. It is worship. So for people just to embrace work and see that as the way we contribute, it's part of the cultural mandate. It's part of creation care in the best sense. And that it is as needful for us and as hallowed as eating or rest or leisure or sex. And that we could see both that and the fact that we work to provide for ourselves and have something to share, as Paul says. That's just a big thing to me. And the whole thing that it is God's economy. Our work is, God has a claim on all of that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So we're wrapping up the series this week.
But let me just say this, it is counterintuitive, because I've got this group of men that kind of come and hang out here. They don't go to this church, and they just, some friends I met at another place, and they don't have a place to have, third place. So they got a third place here. So I've had this book that said Practicing the King's Economy, and they just all look at that with like, what? Like that they can't even wrap their hands around that. You see what I'm saying? And I don't think that they're alone in that. I think most Christians would probably scratch their head too.
Yeah.
Maybe not our people.
Yeah, well, that's actually it's interesting that what happens there with that inviting neighbors in and allowing them to see sort of what we do and how we talk about these kinds of things is exactly what we're moving into in the next series, which we're calling The Art of Neighboring. Can you tell us a little bit about why we would name a series on 1 Peter The Art of Neighboring?
It's a good question. Well, as I thought about 1 Peter, I did preach 1 Peter, I think about 8 years ago, and it hit me that 1 Peter is really relevant for us the way it never has been in the Western civilization. And what I mean by that is this. It's sort of the Daniel of the Old Testament. We sort of lived in Christendom where Christianity did inform so many things. And Ten Commandments are on walls and everywhere. And so we're living in this. People aren't Christians, but the culture is more soaked in a Christian ethos. And that is no more. As Charles Taylor said, it was easy. It would be hard to be an atheist in the 16th century. It's almost impossible to be a theist in the 21st century. Secularism is such a hold. And so the day is over. Like when I was growing up, there were Billy Graham crusades. Okay, so people were just getting information, sort of being converted because they were conversant in sort of a Christian narrative, or they've been through Sunday school. That is no more. The Christianity is looked almost as a threat to cultural thriving in a lot of places. And so we've lost all our cultural power, our economic power. And so we find ourselves where Peter is talking to this group of believers about what it means to be a new community, a new polos, have a citizenship in heaven, and to shine like lights in a dark place. And so we are talking about the gospel to the Greeks. We're talking about the gospel where there's no plausibility structure. So how do we make Christianity believable? So it seems to me it has to happen more relationally. We have to move more locally. So that Christianity has found a way to thrive in every culture. It's found a way to be the people of joy, even in deep suffering. And so as we have been pushed more into isolation, we might say, we need to start noticing there's just a lot of broken people. We walk out our front door, and so our spheres of influence is where we're going to communicate the gospel. And as you and I know, and this is death for a preacher, 90% of communication is nonverbal. It's action, it's being present. And so for the average Colliervillian, suburbanite, we have our community, in clubs, people with affinity, people that have the same kind of soul. So that might be where we find that. But where do we find a place where people are really real and they care about us from what we're really dealing with and actually hear us? And so I think that it's a tremendous opportunity for us to move back into our neighborhoods, go back to the ancient ways. And I've talked to a lot of people that have met their neighbors for the first time. And rather than thinking, wow, let's get out of this pandemic where we can still just keep our virtual friends and all our likes on Facebook, or just go back to our virtual affinity groups that meet everywhere, why don't we just really invest in people where our only flesh can be right there. It can only be right there. And why don't we try to be everything to a few people? So that's the art of neighboring. And so we really are going to ask people to do that. And we're hopefully have meaningful conversation about that. And so I'm excited that our Cyber Sunday School is going to focus on that. And we have a book that we're going to share where people can kind of keep up and look at that. And so hopefully it will stimulate some meaningful dialogue. Just like Daniel was meaningfully chosen for a time of pandemic, so is 1 Peter, as you and I have talked about this. We just think this is what God's called us to at this time, and we may be here a long time. And even if when it comes out, what could be better than if we were just known as people who brought blessing to a place. What could be better than that? Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. I appreciate you taking the time today.
Well, it's fun.
This is really good.
Yeah, it's good stuff, isn't it? Highly recommend it. So shout out to Social Cup.
Yeah.
If you haven't been there, go by there and get to support the local coffee place.
They people rave about their lobster rolls too.
I heard about
Who
that.
would have thought lobster rolls
Not
at
me.
a coffee shop?
Not me.
Well,
That's
this
really-
guy's an innovator.
Yeah, good for him.
All right.
All right, thanks.
Well, thanks for tuning into our very first Cyber Sunday School. And feel free to join the conversation in the comment section below. In the weeks to come, we'll have specific questions about the sermon text and the book that we're reading. But for today, we'd just love to hear from you about what you thought was the most provocative or challenging thing about this Practicing the King's Economy series. And make sure you click the link below to the Bible Project video on the theme of Sabbath in Scripture. I think that will really help to enhance today's message for you and tie together some of those themes. In addition to the video on the day's theme, each week we're also going to be introducing the Bible Project overview of 1 Peter throughout this series. And I think that's really going to help us keep our bearings as we dive into the individual texts. These are very short, very well done illustrated videos that I think your whole family can really benefit from. Now, speaking of really great artwork, next week I'll be interviewing our own artist in residence and new ruling elder, Clint Baker, in his home studio, where we're going to be talking about the process of creating the artwork that will accompany our series, The Art of Neighboring. So if you like to hear the story behind the music, so to speak, you are really going to love this peek into the madness and genius of our very own Clint. And we're also going to get into the book Everyday Church by Tim Chester and Steve Timmis, which follows the outline of 1 Peter, but gets really practical about how elect exiles can live in a provocatively hopeful way. We plan to cover the first chapter in the next 2 weeks, so if you don't have it yet, you've still got time. And if you don't want to read along at all, I promise you, you won't be left behind or lost. We hope Cyber Sunday School will be encouraging to you in this season of disconnection. And until we meet again, grace and peace.